Okay, so now we made it to the next section. I hope it's starting to become fun to you because you're creating something, and it feels really good when you make it to that point where you start figuring things out, when it starts making sense to you because you're playing around with the code and you're learning new possibilities on how to manipulate things. So I'm hoping it's getting fun to you and you start developing a passion for this. I always say that it's desire that gets you started, but it's passion that keeps you going. So if you made it now to this point and you're still in our cohort and you're still working hard, I'm hoping that the passion is building for you. And if you're finding this video and you're not a part of the cohort, guess what? You have access to the curriculum as well, and it's a free resource. The link is in the description. You don't have to register for anything, but you can subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you can get all my latest videos when I post them. Okay, so let's get into the curriculum. Composing functions. The practice of using functions to build other functions is known as a function composition. Know what what this means, or simply composition is what we call it. We're going to do a palindrome checker. A palindrome can be defined as a word that is spelled the same backwards and forwards. Some examples are taco cat, kayak, and race car. Note, there are other factors that are sometimes included in the definition of a palindrome. For example, an alternative definition is that a palindrome is a sentence or phrase that contains letters in the same order, whether considered from beginning to end and end to beginning, ignoring punctuation, cases, and spaces. We want to write a Boolean function, a function that returns true or false, to determine if a word is a palindrome. One way to state the palindrome condition is to say that a palindrome is a string that is equal to its reverse. In other words, we can test for palindromes by taking a string, reversing it, and then comparing the reverse string to the original. If the two are equal, we have a palindrome. To that end, it would be very useful to have a function that reverses a string, wouldn't it? Now here we go. We have a function, and we're showing you how to build something step by step. First, we want to make sure it's working, so we're going to write a simple function. So here we go. Let's write a function that gives a string and returns its reverse. One approach is to use an accumulator pattern. And you remember how accumulator pattern works. We're going to define a function. We'll call it reverse. We're passing it a parameter. We create a variable, and we're going to we're declaring and initializing a variable with an empty string. When you hear that you are going to store something inside of an empty string or empty array, think accumulator pattern. So we know we're putting a for loop in here. So we want to iterate over whatever is when we invoke this function and we pass a word in. It now becomes this object right here, which is coming from this parameter. So it's acting as a variable. And then it's going to do what? It's going to check, is there anything at 0 index? Because that's where we initialized it at. If this condition right here is true, then it's going to print whatever is at index 0. And what we're going to do is we want to reverse it. So it's going to go reverse it, meaning it's going to put it at the end, hold it at the end of this particular variable, or now soon to be object. And we want to get access to it through this, what we call a bracket notation, which is the index. So whatever is stored here in this string object, we want to put it into this reverse object or variable, which means it's going to go, this going to be last, and every time we get a new index, like when we get to index 1, whatever is stored in index 1, then it's going to go next. So whatever 0 is going to be all the way at what we call the right end, and then it's going to go left. And then we're going to return reversed. Now, this is the same algorithm that we used previously to reference reverse a string, reverse string. Remember that? Another approach is to use the fact that there is a reverse method for arrays, and that the method split and join allow us to go from string to arrays and back. This was covered in arrays method. Now notice something here. We're going to get the same exact result, but it's a different way of doing it. Remember when I told you do not memorize syntax. Understand what it does. Now we're going to do some method chaining here in a minute. But what we're doing here, we created the same, defined the same function reverse, pass string as a parameter, but this time we're creating variables and we're storing this string parameter, and we're using a method like the split method, because you can only a string cannot be altered. Remember that it has to be split to make the string broken down to individual characters, and we know that the split method needs a delimiter, and we have and it's going to be a string, but we have a closed string, an empty string, but there's no spaces in it, so it lets me know to split it on each character. And then it goes, we have another variable that we created or declared. It's called reverse letter array. So now this time we're getting the letter array that we are storing whatever the argument is now from the parameter, and now we're reversing it with this reverse method, which doing the same thing as this. And then it's going to store it in this reversed letter array. And then when we return it, we're going to return that variable, which is an object, with the join method, and we have what we call the string. Bring everything in that string back together. Now let's break down the steps carried out by this function, which I did, but we're going to read it. Turn the string into an array of characters we call the string.split, using an empty string as a splitting character. Returns an array of the individual characters that make up the string. Reverse the array of characters. To do this, we use the built-in array method reverse, and then join the reverse character array into a string. We call .join. Joining with the empty string is the same as concatenating each of the individual characters together into a single string. Then I want you to try this. Open it up, try it, and tell me what it did. So it says use method chaining. We just went over method. We just talked about method chaining. We haven't did it because this is not method chaining. This is method chaining down here. Up here is not. Method chaining makes things a lot easier to read. So use method chaining to reduce reverse functions to a single line. Open the link below, the source code above, to give it a shot. So go ahead and play around with this and see what happens. So using our reverse function string, we can create our palindrome checker. Recall that our approach would be to take the string argument, reverse it, and then compare the reverse string to the original string. So this is what it looks like. I have two functions here. The reverse, first I have the reverse, and we'll call this a helper function. That's what we normally call functions that help other functions. This is a helper function, and we're using this right here to check from my helper function. Since palindromes uses our reverse function, this is an example of composition. Does our palindrome function work? Run it yourself and see. Play around with it. Function should do exactly one thing. Remember, I talked about that earlier when I was talking about the analogy of the house, and in the house the house is our program, and in our house we have functions. One of the function groups is our HVAC system, and in our HVAC system is our central air unit, our furnace, and our water heater. Now all three of those do one thing, exactly one thing. And that's how, and you're able to break it up. So if my my central air goes out, it doesn't affect my furnace. So I can just fix that. So that's why we want your functions to just do one thing. Sometimes that doesn't happen, but strive for it. That's what we're trying to tell you to do. An important consideration when writing a function is size. By size, we mean that functions should be short and, more importantly, do exactly one thing. This principle is easier to state than to put into practice. For example, what if we had to write is palindrome without breaking out the reverse code into a separate function? This is what it would look like. This function is still short, which is good, but does it do one thing? Check if a string is a palindrome or multiple things. Check the string and reverse a string. That's two things, not one. This is a bit subjective, and here the answer is certainly debatable. Some cases will be much more clear-cut. However, consider the sandwich function, make sandwich, from the section A Good Function Writing Process. Suppose we want to expand the capability of our program to not only make a sandwich, but to also pour beverage to go along with our lunch. It would be a bad idea to amend our function to do both, ending up with a function that has a name like make sandwich and pour drink. A much better solution will look like this. We have three functions. Why is this better? Smaller functions are easier to debug. For one thing, and by separating single responsibilities into individual functions, we also make our code easier to read and more reusable. In looking at the make lunch function, it is very clear what is going on. First, it makes a sandwich, then it pours a drink. Where the make lunch function is simply contains all of the code necessary to carry out both tasks. There will be no clear separation between one task and the other. And the only way we might describe the various sections of the larger function would be to use comments. And as we have discussed, comments should be a secondary option for explaining your code. Okay, we made it to the end of this section. I just wanted to complete that one. Wasn't nothing here that I wanted to have to break down because I want you to try for yourself. So that's the end of this video. See you in the next section. Remember, the more you do, the more you improve.